Hello, Sim here. In this video I'm going to be walking you guys through DumaOS and its setup on the Netgear XR500. So before I dive into that, I'm going to do a quick recap on the hardware because there's some stuff I'm sure you guys won't be aware of. Now we know that we got a 2.4 GHz and a 5 GHz Wi-Fi, and it's got a multi-user MIMO, so concurrent Wi-Fi access, so everybody can use their Wi-Fi devices at the same time and still access the internet, not just one at a time. It sports 128 megs of flash, and it's got half a gigs of RAM in it. And supposedly, according to the literature, if you look at it in the manual, a dual-core 1.7 GHz processor. But there is a bit more to this hardware than Netgear literature tells you about, and it just doesn't do the Nighthawk any justice. Now the Netgear R7800 also sports a dual-core 1.7 GHz processor, and that router is known to use a Qualcomm IPQ8065 SoC. That's a system on chip. Now the XR500 is either using that same Qualcomm processor or a minor revision to it, but either way, we're talking about a quad-core network processor, not a dual-core one. So this is where I'm saying that Netgear really isn't blowing their trumpet to emphasize the horsepower perspective. So the Qualcomm IPQ8065 is a system on chip. It sports more than just a single CPU. It's like a motherboard compressed inside a chip. So it's got a dual-core 1.7 GHz processor and a dual-core 800 MHz processor for dealing with the network subsystem. All the stuff that happens at the network level, i.e. receiving and sending of packets. These are there, dedicated just for that. So apparently there's no jitter, and you can think of this as hardware acceleration. And of course, DumaOS is going to take advantage of that. So you see why I wanted to really emphasize that. It's an important thing because what's going to happen is that you've got these two 800 MHz CPUs doing the network processing at the lower level, and you've got these two other dual-core 1.7 GHz processors twiddling their thumbs. What could they do? Ooh, I'm sure DumaOS is going to take advantage of that for sure. So let's move on to the setup. When you first plug in your Netgear XR500, your web browser should automatically launch. If it doesn't, you're going to need to type in the URL that's presented on screen right now. So you'll get a license agreement that pops up, and you can read it if you want to, or just click next. Once you've done that, it's going to ask you to confirm that you've plugged in your Ethernet cable into like a modem, the socket in the wall. In other words, have you plugged your router into the internet, so to speak. So once you go, yep, I got my cables plugged in correctly, click next, and it's going to do some basic tests. And then it'll ask you how you wish to proceed in setting up your internet. You are going to get presented with three options. Automatically do it for me, please. I want to manually configure it myself, or restore your setup from a file that you've previously saved away. And this is something that's only going to occur if you've had to do a factory reset for some reason and you need to restore your configuration settings from a file you've saved away, having set it up at least once, obviously, right? So in this walkthrough, we're just going to go and select automatic detection. Now it's going to take some time for it to check your internet, and providing that it's all successful, you're going to get greeted with an appropriate screen. In my case, PPPoE detected. Sweet! And then you just enter your username and password, click next, and wait for it to connect. Once it's connected, we click next to continue with the setup. And here it's going to go and determine your internet speeds. Now the speeds reported in my case are similar to those reported by speedtest.net. And obviously by determining what your bandwidth is, because I hate using the word speed, it's going to aid the QoS or quality of service, in other words what we know in DumaOS as anti-buffer bloat, which I'm going to cover later. If it happens to fail to detect your speed for whatever reason, it will tell you, and you just click next. In my case, I had this occur once, and it said I had a gigabit download and upload, and I went, no I don't. But it does tell you that it's failed, but I've only had it once happen to me. I've factory reset it a few times to test stuff out. So you then get greeted with your username and password setup screen. All fairly obvious stuff for me, and you just go and select security questions and some appropriate answers. Once you've done that, you're then going to get presented with a Wi-Fi screen. Here it's pretty easy to just click next, but I always personally recommend that you change your default passwords for Wi-Fi, because if you leave it at that, well, the XR500 and possibly all other Netgears are going to have the same password, so anybody can log into your Wi-Fi network if you just leave everything with defaults. And Sim's going to tell you, don't do that. Go and change the password, please. So it's also fairly easy to skip over this screen and just click next once you've changed your password for the 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi. Sim has done it on more than one occasion, hence a factory reset to get the appropriate video footage for this video. So at the bottom of the screen there's a little tick box that's already ticked, so to speak. So you click on that and you will then get presented with like the 5 GHz Wi-Fi sections. Now the idea from reading the text on the screen is like, you could use the same password for it, but this is probably a Sim thing. I like to have everything as like 2 Wi-Fi networks. That's just a personal preference, but I found this particular screen so easy to skip over. So I think it needs a little bit of tweaking to make it more obvious to the user because it's so easy to click next. So once you've done that, you're going to get presented with a final screen where you've got the option to print it if you want to. And for me, I'm just going to click next. I guess it all depends on how hard you've made your passwords. So the router then goes and does its checks to see if there's any new firmware updates out there. And it lets you know whether you're running the latest or not, or whether you need an update. In my case, I'm running the latest, so I'm just going to click next. You will then get prompted to log into your router, and you'll be presented with the DumaOS tour. And at this point, you're sort of more or less ready to rock and roll. In other words, it's time to go and play with your shiny new router. So now I'm going to start with the Netgear settings, as this particular section is the foundations for everything else. This settings section is split into 6 groups, basically getting you online with some basic Wi-Fi, logging, blocking internet access, router admin, USB, and advanced stuff that you should definitely be utilizing. So let's go to the setup section. The internet setup gives you PPPoE, which is what I use, L2TP and PPTP, modem protocol connectivity options. This is where you're going to provide your username and password, and typically you're going to get assigned an IP address. If your ISP does not require a login, then typically you enter in the values given to you provided by your ISP. Clicking on the setup wizard will do the automatic internet connection detection that we saw earlier in the video when switching on the router for the very first time. Typically you're not going to be using this option unless you've changed ISP, etc., or got a new package and you've got a new modem and all that jazz. The WAN setup, wide area network. It allows you to put a device such as a console or another router into a DMZ, demilitarized zone, that's what it stands for. And those of you who have watched previous videos of mine will know that we have to reserve that device an IP address, and we go and enter it in here. So you do that reserving in the LAN setup, which I'll cover in a minute. The port scan and DOS, denial of service protection, responding to ping on internet, should remain disabled and unticked for security reasons. Now similarly, the IGMP option should also remain ticked to block multicast traffic from the internet, so pretty much leave these ones on their defaults. Now the MTU, maximum transmission unit, should have been configured for you automatically by the internet setup stage that you did when you first switched on the router and all that jazz. The value is going to be very specific to the protocol that you have to use to connect to your ISP. In my case it's PPPoE, and that value is 1492. The NAT, network address translation, filtering should remain on its default of secure. Now the SIP-ALG, the Session Initiation Protocol Application Layer Gateway, that just rolls off the tongue. This is all to do with voice over IP, including video. This is for specialized multimedia communication applications, and most of us just don't use this stuff. Thus, the disable tick box should remain unticked. Unless you're using specialized multimedia, you will not need to go in and use this option. So the LAN setup gives you access to changing the router's device's name, but when you click on that edit button, it takes you to another page which I'll cover later on. But more importantly, it allows you to configure your IP address range for devices connecting to your home network via the XR500. Most people will not need to muck around with the IP address, subnet mask or routing information protocol settings, as all of this is really for those who do exotic home network setups. However, the bottom section of this page is what you guys are going to be interested in: DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. DHCP is what you're going to use to allow you to assign static IPs to your consoles. The DHCP automatically gives IP addresses to anything that connects to the network, but we can go and use the reserve an IP address for specific devices. As far as the console knows, it's just getting an IP address automatically from the router. So it's still using DHCP, we've just done the static reserving an IP address on the router, and so everything should remain all hunky-dory when it comes to UPnP and automatically opening ports and getting open NATs. Now, just jumping slightly ahead there, but you don't have to do it on your console, you can just do it all on your router. Now here we're going to click Add, providing the device is currently powered on and talking to the router is going to be listed at the top of the page. And you can click the circle selection box for that device, which then populates the bottom 3 fields automatically for you. Typically at this point you change the IP address, the last value on the right, to a value you want. If your device is not present, then you're just going to have to enter the MAC address manually. It's just easier to have it switched on. So click Add and then click Apply for the new IP address to take effect. If the IP address change does not take effect, then you're just going to need to reboot your PC or console, etc. for it to pick up the new IP address. It's as simple as that. The WPS setup, or Wi-Fi protected setup. It's something I've never used on any router that I've owned, and I typically have this disabled. I'm going to call it a sim thing. I'm mad about security and I like my security. But if you want to play with WPS, there is a wizard. Now the wireless setup page allows you to do one thing that I always like to do with my Wi-Fi networks, and that is to disable the SSID broadcast. In other words, this stops your Wi-Fi network name being public and stops allowing anyone with a Wi-Fi device to find your network easily. For those already wondering about MAC address filtering, that is in the advanced settings section and I will cover that shortly. It should also be noted that turning off the SSID broadcast will disable WPS. The Enable Smart Connect is what I believe the Netgear setup we stepped through at the beginning of the video tries to do for you automatically. It's just the GUI doesn't make it clear enough that both the 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz was sort of being merged and appear as one Wi-Fi network, potentially cutting down administration. I've left the 20-40 MHz coexistence enabled. I want the best 2.4 Wi-Fi support we can have. Now, for security for both networks should never be set to none. The default encryption protocol being used is WPA2 PSK AES. TKIP should be avoided if possible because its encryption today is considered relatively weak, almost the same as WEP. Just depends if you've got an old Wi-Fi device, so AES is preferred. The WPA/WPA2 Enterprise is for business use only, and it requires a Radius server to be set up, so you guys will not be using this option. For those wondering, Sim can get full whack internet speeds on 5 GHz Wi-Fi, so for me that's approximately 76 megabits down. And on the 2.4 GHz, approximately 65 megabits down. And that's in all 4 corners of the house, upstairs and downstairs, so yeah, that's pretty damn good, man. Now, the guest network page allows you to do just that. Set up 2 Wi-Fi networks for guests. By default, this is disabled. Again, AES for encryption should be selected ideally. You really don't want it all unencrypted and stuff. I would also suggest strongly not ticking allow guests to see each other and access my local network. By leaving it unticked, which is the default, then they can only access the internet. That's what they should need to do anyway, right? Guests just want to see and browse their social media and stuff and just access the internet. You don't want them sniffing around on your home network and looking at your data, do you? Nah, I didn't think so. Right, moving on. The router mode page is one found on all Netgear routers these days. You've got two choices in this particular case. Leave it as a router, which is definitely what you guys want, or turn it into a dumb Wi-Fi access point. Now you may be wondering, but why would you want that option? Now let's imagine it's 5-10 years down the line, this router would well and truly be superseded, right? New hardware, new software. So a Wi-Fi extension point gives you another option of extending its life. Today, however, you're definitely going to be keeping it as a router because you want the power of DumaOS, right? The device name page allows you to change, well, the name of the device. Yeah, so if you want to not call it an XR500 and you want to call it Sim Super Duper Router or something, you can do so. So let's move on to the monitoring section. Think logs. So the traffic meter allows you to do exactly that. Watch how much bandwidth your house is using. Useful if your ISP provides you with a data cap. By default, the traffic meter is disabled. Personally, it is not a function I need because I have unlimited data. Well, within reason. I mean, if you're going to abuse it, your ISP is going to have some strong words with you, right? So by simply enabling it and keeping a no limit selected, you can just watch how much data is being consumed by your household. If you do need to control bandwidth usage, you can apply that just to download only or upload and download, in other words, both directions. You can set the monthly limit, and if you have a dial-up connection type arrangement with your ISP, i.e. you connect, do some stuff, disconnect from your ISP, I'm thinking like ISDN, certainly back in the 90s, you would get charged every time you connected. So the round-up data volume for each connection by option is for this, where it consumes X amount of data for purely connecting to your ISP. I suspect most people will not need this, but it's there if you need it. The traffic counter section, you would enter the date and time approximately to correspond with your ISP bill, right? Because it's just like a mobile phone. You get a new bill, your data usage resets. Yeah, so it's the same thing. You can, if you want, limit the maximum number of hours your house is allowed to connect to the internet for rather than specifying data. It seems a bit strange to me, but hey, the option's there. Once your data cap's being approached, you can set a threshold value to give you a warning. But the frustrating thing for me about this option is you've got to be logged on to the router and have this specific page displayed to get the warning, so it's not great. Once your limit is reached, however, you can tell the router to either go flash your internet LEDs on the router. Obviously, you need to make sure your router is in a central location to see it flashing and blinking its lights and going, hello, hello, you're about to run out of internet, or just disconnect you from the internet. That could be a bit problematic if you're right in the middle of an important online transaction, for example. I think this particular section would benefit from an email notification option, so that, let's say you've got 1 gig's worth of download remaining and that's what your trigger was, for it to email you, so you pick it up on your phone or whatever and go, oh boy, I better go and sort that stuff out. I think that would be a better option, but that's me. So moving on to logs. Most users will probably not be looking at this particular section, but it's there for diagnostic reasons predominantly. But it's also there to log when bad people attacking your home internet, i.e. denial of service, port scans, which is people trying to find an open port and doing searching through every single port number available, trying to break into your home network. By default, all options are ticked in the log, and my suggestion is to leave it that way. Statistics. Anyone who's ever owned a Netgear in the past will be familiar with this screen. Yep, it's just another basic statistics, but it's another useful diagnostic screen if you've got problems. Similarly, the connection status screen tells you about, yep, you guessed it, your connection status. How long have you been connected to your ISP? And on this screen you can also force a disconnect from your ISP, if you want to. Perhaps you've got some kind of problem and you need to force that disconnect, and then you click connect to reconnect. Moving on to the content filtering section. First up is block sites. Here you can add keywords which either form part of a domain name or a fully qualified domain name. Let's say you don't want them visiting yahoo.com, for example, or Google. But obviously parents will get the idea of what this is all about. By default, keyword blocking is off. You can either have it on always or per schedule, as defined in the schedule section. You can also add just one trusted IP address. Typically, I think this is going to be associated with the parent or the router administrator that is allowed to visit said sites. I see the block sites feature as a parental control one, and this is why reserving DHCP addresses comes in handy, which I covered under the LAN setup. It is not just useful for open NAT gaming style issues, but for also disabling internet access when kids should be in bed. So this is where block services comes in. So providing you have a reserved IP address for all of your kids' devices, you can then either specify them individually or as a range depending on how you've specified their IP addresses. Perhaps they have 5 devices between them and they happen to have IP addresses 110 to 114, so you can specify a range instead. It cuts down on all the administration. The schedule page then allows you to specify the schedule for the blocking outage. Here I have unticked all day and entered a start and stop time, so 8 o'clock at night, which is 2000 hours, and 7:30 in the morning. For example, their bedtime, right? And you just click apply. The email page though is just purely for emailing you when somebody tries to visit a blocked site. So moving on to the administration section, you can change your password for your router, go and check for a firmware update, and you click check and it goes and tells you whether you're up to date or not. If you are, it downloads it onto your computer and then you go and browse for it and then you go and flash your router. So the auto update feature on this page is a little bit misleading. It's not quite the same as a Windows auto update. It gets triggered by you logging onto the router. So they really need to tweak the name, and this is from me reading the help on the router itself, because it's a bit misleading. So it's not your typical auto update, but if it was, it would be good to have a schedule window for when it's going to happen, i.e. do it whilst you're sleeping and not during the middle of the day when you're using the internet, right? I haven't had an update yet, so I cannot confirm its precise behavior, but this is my current understanding of it. Now, backup settings is exactly that. Go and save all your configuration info and allows you to restore it later, following on from a factory reset, which you can do on this particular page or via using the physical factory reset button that's on the back of the router. Reboot, well, it does exactly that. You click on reboot and it asks you, do you really want to reboot your router? Yep. Now, the USB storage section I'm going to quickly gloss over, as it's a function that I do not and will not personally use, as I want the router to focus on doing its primary job, network routing. I don't want it to do all this media server jazz. However, it's there and available. So you got the media server section, which allows you to use a USB device, memory stick, a portable hard drive for streaming content via DLNA. You got Ready Share Storage, which is allowing you to have network shares, for example, hosted via your router. There's the Ready Share Vault, which is like a backup solution that Netgear provides. So you can back up your data from your PC onto your USB device connected to your router. And the USB settings page also allows you to either disable and enable the USB port functionality full stop, and which USB devices are allowed to be authorized to be connected to that router. So if we now move on to the advanced settings section, this is where I'm going to see most gamers diving into every so often, and certainly when you initially set up your router. The advanced wireless section allows you to turn on and off your Wi-Fi, along with disabling the WPS feature. Most importantly for me, it allows you to go and add Wi-Fi devices to your MAC address filtering. So by going to the wireless card access list, you can enter your Wi-Fi device's MAC address manually. There is no other option. So unfortunately, even if the access control list was turned off and you had your Wi-Fi device like Sim's mobile phone connected to it, it doesn't present you with a table of connected devices which you can select from to make your administration easier before you decide to turn the access control on. Right, so I'm going to jump around and a bit out of order for the next bit, and it's going to make sense for sure. So you've got UPnP and port forwarding, which you guys will be familiar with from watching previous videos of mine, but now there is a third option called port triggering. UPnP, or Universal Plug and Play, is a network protocol that allows consoles and games to open up ports that they require to automatically go and open up ports and stuff without user intervention. It's great stuff. It's what you want to go and get that open NAT without doing any work. However, as I've mentioned in other videos, I always recommend reserving an IP address via DHCP for gaming consoles and PCs. Right, so what is port triggering? Most of you have heard about port forwarding, and we typically do port forwarding when our game of interest decides it's not going to do UPnP requests properly and we need to go and enable port forwarding to go and get that open NAT. So to do port forwarding, we need to have a static IP address associated with our gaming machine of interest. However, for port triggering, we do not need to do this, and it's a more secure option, and I'd recommend it especially for gamers. So port triggering, we simply specify the port and its protocol. So for COD, for example, typically it's port 3074 UDP, and you can select other ports as well. So once the game asks for that port gets automatically opened by the router and automatically assigned to the IP address who just asked for it, and allows outside traffic from the internet to communicate with your game, so think dedicated servers and other gamers, etc. And once you're no longer using that port after a period of time, which the default in this case is 20 minutes, the port automatically closes, and thus no one can start attacking you on that port as it is now closed. So what about port forwarding then? Here, the major difference is that the port is always open and is associated with a single IP address, always the same one internally in your home network. So typically you're going to use this for the likes of FTP or some other kind of access because you want to log into your NAS or server whilst you're out and about. Thus, as I mentioned earlier, for gamers I would recommend using port triggering when your game of interest is not making proper UPnP requests correctly, so that you can go and get yourself an open NAT. Now, dynamic DNS is an option I don't see most gamers using. I personally won't be using this feature. Your ISP provides you with DNS servers already, domain name services. So it just looks up web addresses and translates that into an IP address. It's like a telephone directory, but for the internet. So I only really see this option being used in some exotic home network setup. VPN, virtual private network options are available. Again, I do not use VPN at present, so I can't comment on this in depth. The VPN service allows you to access your home network from the internet in a secure way. And similarly, the VPN client allows you to access the internet from home in a secured, encrypted way, or appear in another country, for example, depending on your VPN provider, right? So the static routes section is going to be used again by those who have exotic home networks. The route allows you to specify destination IPs along with a subnet mask, the gateway IP, and the metric, which equates to the number of routers on your home network. As I said, most people will not be playing around with this. It's advanced stuff. So remote management is exactly that. It allows you to go and manage your router from the internet. Again, most people will not be using this option, and thus it should remain disabled, which it is by default because you don't want people coming in from the internet, going and taking over your home network and doing nasty stuff, do you? Nope. So the IPv6 section is exactly that. In my case, by default, it is disabled. This might be set to something more appropriately in the initial setup if it detects your ISP supports IPv6. There is an auto detect option, and you can see there's a whole variety of protocols supported there. Selecting one will give you more options very similar to the IPv4 setup. Now, the VLAN bridge settings section will most likely be used by anybody who owns an internet TV. These are known as IPTVs. This is because basically there's some that cannot work behind a NAT. NAT standing for Network Address Translation, which all routers have. So in the case of IPTVs, it's going to be physically connected to one of the Ethernet ports in the back of the router. So let's say it's on port 1. You simply select the bridge group, tick that Ethernet port number, in this case 1, that the TV is plugged into, and voila, you have a working IPTV. However, you cannot use the VLAN tagging network at the same time that you are using bridging. VLAN, which is a virtual local area network, is again only going to be used by advanced users, but the bridge option is of definite interest to most people who are running internet TVs in their house. The LED control setting page, well, this is pretty self-explanatory. The router does have a physical slide switch to turn off all blinking lights except for the main operational router is all good light. And that concludes the Netgear settings section. Phew! So moving on to the system information screen. Now for those of you who were paying attention at the beginning of the video, you would have seen that I was highlighting A7 Legit. Now sadly, A7 Legit, a passionate member of the NetDuma community, passed away last year, and this is NetDuma's way of honouring his contributions by naming the DumaOS codename after him. It's a nice thing to do. So as well as displaying the codename, the current firmware version and the hardware that DumaOS is running on, it also tells you its uptime and load average in a typical Linux fashion. The thing to note here is on average 6% of the dual core CPU is being used. There's lots of headroom here. You'll also get to see the live loading of those 2 CPU cores, but not the 2 additional network cores that are dealing with the packet processing, and you probably don't want to be, querying those because you want to leave those alone and let them do their job. So carrying on with the headroom theme, there's room for growth, and you can see that over 50% of the RAM is free, so just over 256 megabytes. The kernel uses the majority of the RAM compared to DumaOS itself. So for flash, we got 128 megs of storage, and you can see that we just have approximately about a third free. DumaOS uses the majority of the flash, followed by the drivers, then the R apps, and the kernel itself. So on flash you can see that the kernel is pretty small until it gets loaded and runs and executes in RAM, which is a major consumer of that RAM, which for a kernel it's expected. But again, the message is we have room for future growth. In other words, lots of new features, whatever they be. So if we move on to the R apps panel, there's a variety of apps and they should look pretty familiar with what you see on the left hand side of the screen, containing that main navigation menu. The one absence is the R App Store, and is a potential placeholder for future possibilities. Just like our phones, this panel has a flyout menu for our apps to allow you to specify retries. Now perhaps it's there to get around a problematic initialization issue where there's a dependency on another R app or a service, but generally you guys are not going to need to play about with this particular entry. There are 2 panels showing you the Wi-Fi status for your home and guest networks. It's all pretty self-explanatory stuff, and perhaps you've forgotten a password or you need to look up that password for your guest network because, well, you've got a guest staying who needs some Wi-Fi access to get to the internet. The network status and internet status panels do exactly what they say. Simply show you whether you're online, and if so, how many packets have been sent and received. The system info panel also allows you to reboot the router from here, so without having to go and dive into the Netgear settings area that I covered earlier in the video. Finally, there's a logs panel which displays the logs and allows you to download those logs if you need to via the flyout menu. Next, we're going to move on to the network monitor, as it allows me to introduce other concepts and technologies being utilized on the XR500 by the QoS, quality of service, which I will discuss shortly. So this page displays information about download and upload utilization of your internet bandwidth. The bottom graph shows you the overall usage. The bar chart panel at the top then breaks that utilization down by device. Here we can drill down into a device's specific usage. So when it comes to PCs and Macs, Deep Packet Inspection, DPI, not dots per inch but Deep Packet Inspection, is used, and this is where the DumaOS looks inside Ethernet packets payload to determine what kind of traffic it is. But on consoles, this payload, as I've mentioned in other videos, is encrypted, and thus it can only look at port numbers to determine the kind of content, i.e. are we playing a game? And that's what it does. Now for those of you who are not familiar with Ethernet packets and IP headers, here is the SIM analogy for you. So you've got an envelope that you write the send to address on it, and you have a sender, i.e. a return to address on it. Inside that envelope is a letter. Consider this the payload. So with PCs and Macs in general, we can read that letter. Until we come to consoles where it is like spies communicating with each other. In other words, the letter's encrypted. So continuing this analogy, port numbers are like different departments. The letter is still going to the same address, it's just serviced via a different department. And this is written on the front of the envelope. So that's how it knows what stuff is what. So now knowing this, DumaOS can present that information to you. And you would have noted in the video playing in the background that the category breakdown panel and application breakdown panel can be totally independent. So if you're curious of what's going on with your network utilization, this is the page to come to and visit. So let's move on to the device manager page. This shows you the network tree, which continuously updates, or realistically it periodically updates, let's say probably about every 5 seconds or so. Anyway, this network graph shows you what devices are offline, and of course it can only display devices that DumaOS has seen online at least once before. It also shows you what devices are currently connected to the Wi-Fi networks, and also devices that are connected via Ethernet cable, i.e. wired, and are online via that LAN tree. And also for the internet itself, aka the WAN, it shows you how it's connected, via a modem in my case, or perhaps another router in another case. So when you select a device, you can change its name. Its device type, you can select it as being either a laptop, Xbox, phone, TV, printer, PlayStation camera, a Wii, computer, tablet, but no streaming device type options like I'm thinking Fire Sticks and Chromecasts, for example. But I mean, it's just little, it's a graphical symbol. It's not going to affect anything. So you can also copy the MAC address on display here. Let's say for a device that's currently offline, for when you want to reserve an IP address on your LAN in the Netgear settings section, go navigate over to the Netgear bit, paste the MAC address in and off you go. Also, a useful feature here for parents is being able to easily go and ban your kids from internet access full stop. And I'm thinking on an ad hoc scenario compared to the scheduled outage for bedtime that I covered earlier in the video. So perhaps they've been naughty, you just go and simply click block. An icon for that device will go black. Similarly, later on, you can go and click unblock, and once they've, obviously once they've served their punishment and learnt their lesson. Okay, so let's go and move on to QoS. Now QoS, quality of service, or as it is referred to here, anti-buffer bloat, is where we control congestion to reduce those critical gaming packets getting caught in a traffic jam, so to speak, to allow them to arrive in a timely manner, the journey in this case being between game and the game server. Unlike congestion control on a NetDuma R1, here there are no visible algorithms to select. However, we have 3 options to select which affect when the global congestion sliders are applied. The always option is just like the R1. Whatever the congestion control sliders are set to, they always take effect 100% of the time. The never option is a quick way of just turning it off without sliding the sliders all the way back to 100%. Just give me the full bandwidth right now, I'm not gaming, I'm just doing a massive download or something along those lines. However, this is where the when high priority traffic detected option comes in, because you don't have to keep fiddling with your router. And I do like the intent of this feature. Now, I talked about DPI, Deep Packet Inspection, earlier in the network monitor section, and this is where this technology comes into play for PC gaming and the port identification comes into play for console gaming. So when high priority traffic is detected, i.e. the XR500 believes you're gaming, then the anti-buffer bloat global sliders then kick in. You know that high priority traffic has been detected when the circle lights up to a bright red color in the traffic prioritization information panel. So in the ideal world, you can have your sliders set to their optimum position and their effect will only kick in when it realizes you're gaming. And so when you're not gaming but just downloading a brand new game or that massive game patch that just came out today, you're going to still be utilizing your full internet bandwidth. Sweet. Now this works fine on the PS4, but unfortunately at this time, DumaOS always thinks the Xbox One is gaming, even when it is not. So the bandwidth, restrictions that you set on the global sliders will come into effect. So I'm sure this will be updated by a future firmware update. For now though, the workaround for Xbox is just to click Never when doing big downloads, so you don't have to lose your settings. The global sliders can be dragged just like we could on the R1, but now you can type in the percentage values directly or click on up and down arrows, and as soon as you release the mouse button, the update takes effect, so it automatically applies it. There is also a traffic prioritization panel, which I don't think most users will need to mess around with, but there is an option to add additional devices, for selecting a known game, or more likely selecting the advanced option for an unknown port for a game that's not known about currently by the DumaOS, so that the gaming traffic can be successfully detected. The anti-buffer bloat panel has a flyout menu which has the bandwidth settings automatically filled out, which occurred during the initial internet setup stage. Now personally, I've gone and optimized these settings by watching my network utilization on the task manager on my main PC whilst running a bandwidth test to ensure more accurate maximum bandwidth values were being set. The Good Put checkbox is there to ensure that DumaOS is not only calculating but providing you with a more accurate resultant bandwidth when the global sliders take effect. The Disable All QoS option is, for about 99.9% people, if not even higher, is not going to be disabled. If you're disabling it, then it's likely you're doing it for some exotic home network setup. Just leave it disabled. Don't go and disable the QoS, right? But in general, that option should remain unticked. Now the bandwidth allocation panel, which most of us will know as device prioritization, is where things get interesting. We can drag the number in the circles, which I call flower petals, to allocate a guaranteed minimum bandwidth for devices on the network. But this is where things get more interesting, because I remember talking about this in one of my past very original videos about the R1, where I was saying, well, I'd really like to be able to type in bandwidth values, and now you can. Yay, woo! So to do this, you can click on the device of interest on the left hand side and a new panel pops up. You can type the percentage in precisely, or more importantly, precisely allocate its bandwidth. Sweet stuff for that COD tuning, yay! So also note that when sliding the global sliders, it will proportionally go and update those values too. So it's something you need to be aware of, because in this particular case, I'd say set the globals to 97% so you don't get any congestion occurring, and then you can do your device prioritization appropriately. So once you've selected your ideal flower petal values, noting we have an upload and download tab via radio buttons to switch between download and uploads, then you go and click the update distribution for those values to take effect. Unlike the NetDuma R1, when changing the flower petal values with share excess ticked, you do not lose bandwidth. It now does exactly what is intended and ensures devices which you reserve more bandwidth for get that bandwidth when other devices start consuming your internet connection. To get to the share excess option, you need to click on the flyout menu and untick it. Note that there are two flyout options or menus for both the upload and download. So I've typically used the unticking of shared access when playing games like Call of Duty World War II to limit its bandwidth, as lag compensation tends to improve whilst giving me the bandwidth I need for my streaming laptop at the same time. The methodology for optimizing one's buffer bloat, I've covered that in my NetDuma Ultimate Guide video, so please consult that video and use its table of contents to jump to the relevant section. Resetting distribution will reset the flower petals for whichever view you are on. So only do it on the upload if you're on upload, or only do it on the download if you're on the download. So flip between the two, reset it, and therefore they will both be reset. But do note that it doesn't reset the share excess, so you have to go to both upload and download sub panels to go and retick it, for example. So that concludes anti-buffer bloat. Moving on to the Geo-Filter, which is the predominant reason for getting a router that is running NetDuma software. Now the top panel is where you can add devices, in other words gaming machines, whether that be PC or console, to allow you to take advantage of the Geo-Filter. So you have to add your device to be able to use the Geo-Filter, and you can only have a maximum of 4 devices added at one time. Now, as we have named our devices in the device manager screen, it makes selecting our gaming machines much easier. So by clicking on add device, you get prompted with a list of devices to select from, and you simply select a device of interest and click done. However, if your gaming device is a PC, then you click on next and you will get prompted with another menu for a Geo-Filter profile selection, and the PC will then be set automatically to spectating mode. You will see in my case that Sims Beast has Call of Duty PC underneath it compared to the console statement under my PS4 and Xbox One. Since you can switch between filtering mode and spectating mode, it is unclear what effect this Geo-Filter profile, in my case Call of Duty PC, has. So what is filtering mode versus spectating mode? Well, filtering mode forces the server or the host to be inside the Geo-Filter circle. Remember, host is when you can have peer-to-peer too. So spectating mode does not force connections to be inside the Geo-Filter, and it's recommended by NetDuma for PC gaming as the setting to use, presumably because there are supposedly more proper dedicated servers for PC gaming, but hey, we just selected Call of Duty and we all know that that's a bit of a mixed bag. If you're lucky, you're going to get a dedicated server. If you're not, it's peer-to-peer. So effectively, spectating mode turns off your Geo-Filter but still allows you to see what you are connecting to. Now the strict mode option is available via the flyout menu on the Geo-Filter map. Strict mode guarantees that dedicated servers or hosts that are outside of your Geo-Filter are blocked, thus slowing down matchmaking. But you want a local server, right? A little bit of sacrifice for that sort of like sweet connection. However, what strict mode does not do is block other players from joining the server that's inside your Geo-Filter who are outside of your Geo-Filter. Although in general more players are going to typically be inside your Geo-Filter, there are going to be times when they are not, and I'm thinking COD here because that's the game I predominantly play. I recommend if you play Call of Duty that strict mode is enabled. And for those who play Destiny, which is another peer-to-peer game, NetDuma recommend that you do not tick this option. So the kilometers and miles options, well, simply change the Geo-Filter's radius reported value, which is near the profiles button on the right hand side of the screen, from miles and kilometers. Woohoo! So whilst we are in the flyout menu, you may be wondering what Flush Cloud does. Those who are already familiar with NetDuma software know that the way the Geo-Filter works is via a Geo IP database, which it looks up locally on the router, having fetched it from the cloud. Similar to Google knowing roughly where you live, based via your IP address. However, NetDuma supplement this with additional info, like is it a dedicated gaming server? Is it a matchmaking server? Is it a key gaming network server such as one provided by Xbox Live? As well as additional info like it is actually located here, because sometimes the databases or wherever they grab this information is out of date, so they have to update its location. If for some reason that database gets corrupted, then you will click on Flush Cloud. It is rare for that to occur from past experience with a NetDuma R1, but if you ever have problems with a Geo-Filter, the option is there. Now for those familiar with the NetDuma R1, there is a key feature missing, and that is Ping Assist. Ping Assist allows you to connect to unknown dedicated servers by using a ping threshold, and thus allows you to play games that have just launched whilst waiting for the Geo-Filter cloud database to be updated. It also caters for when new servers are being brought online in a data center that serves your game of interest. So hopefully Ping Assist will arrive in a future update. I see this as a vital feature to the Geo-Filter. Now the auto ping host does exactly that. When you are playing a game, it will bring up another panel which tells you the host's average ping along with a ping graph, but more importantly, whether that host is a dedicated server or a peer. In other words, you're playing peer-to-peer and another gamer is hosting the game. When it is a dedicated server, it will report the IP address and which gaming data center is providing that service, like Volta. What would be cool is for that information to also display the country or city of interest, so like city, country, that would be cool. By clicking the home icon, it allows you to change your Geo-Filter's home location. You will notice as I hover over countries and states that it lights them up. I cover the methodology of optimizing your Geo-Filter in my NetDuma Ultimate Guide video, so please consult that if you wish to take advantage of your Geo-Filter capability. Again, use the table of contents in that video description to jump to that section. So, the magnifying glass allows you to zoom in on the Geo-Filter, but to only one level of magnification. On a 1440p screen, this may look fine, but trust me, on a laptop sporting a 720p screen, the zoom is not sufficient if you're trying to optimize your Geo-Filter and see what's going on, so trust me on that one. Screen resolution and the size of your browser window combined appears to have an effect on the magnification. I understand that the zoom feature will be coming back due to popular demand by the NetDuma community. The set distance slider does exactly that, changes the size of your Geo-Filter. Again, you can type in the value directly or use the up and down arrows. Now, Profiles allows you to quickly set the radius of the Geo-Filter to a NetDuma recommended value according to the game you select. For example, Battlefield will cover the entire world from a Geo-Filter radius perspective, but it will apply no changes to strict mode because you saw me pop it out first so you could see the flyout menu before I applied Battlefield and it had no effect. However, you untick that, for example, and then select the Call of Duty profile, it's going to shrink the Geo-Filter and then apply strict mode. Destiny, on the other hand, expands it out and unticks strict mode, so that really does say something about Destiny. So for those who are new to the world of NetDuma, Profiles is a useful feature to get you up and running quickly. So when gaming, the Geo-Filter displays dedicated servers as little computer icons. However, when you're zoomed out, they look like little, vertical rectangles. They're hard to see. However, when you click on one, such as an Xbox Live server, it will show you a Microsoft domain, so you know it's a key gaming network. Other gaming servers for like Call of Duty, for example, and I'm sure other games will show you domains such as Volta, if I pronounced that correct, VULTR. If it's not a dedicated server who is host, then peer will be shown. Blocked players will be shown as triangles, so typically those who are outside your Geo-Filter, and other players will show as people who are inside your Geo-Filter. When auto ping host is enabled, you cannot query other players or servers. So you have to untick that option in the flyout menu, then go and click on the icon of interest to go and query it. The allow and deny feature is very useful for allowing you to play with friends who live on the other side of the world, for example, who are outside of your Geo-Filter. Yay. So you're allowing them. So you click on allow. Alternatively, when you're playing older games with, typical peer-to-peer, I'm thinking old Call of Duties that have hackers galore in it, yes, you can block them, woo! And you can also name these entries in the allow and deny table as you see fit. You can, later on, of course, ping those entries that are in the allow and deny list, provided that the auto ping is off, of course. And additionally, you can delete an entry too. Maybe you've had a big argument with a friend and he's no longer your friend, so you've deleted him off. Could have a bit of fun, man. So that concludes the Geo-Filter section. And finally, the dashboard. This is the only screen on the DumaOS interface that you can go and resize panels. Now you're seeing the default screen and you can remove unwanted panels by clicking on their pins. And if you unclick all of them, then surprise surprise, you can have an empty dashboard. Now to add panels of interest, you simply visit other screens. Click on the pins for the panels of interest, then go back to the dashboard and play about with resizing panels and rearranging their positions. so much fun to be had here. And no, Sim doesn't have any idea of what kind of panels are going to be the best to display on the front dashboard. So I really hope you have enjoyed this detailed walkthrough guide for the Netgear XR500, and if you made it this far, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. At this time, I've had a limited hands-on with the XR500, so this video has been limited to showing you all the features on offer, and there is a lot of them, with this video clocking in around the 1 hour mark. Now, one thing I have learnt whilst making this video is that the Netgear web interface only allows one PC, or should I say web browser capable device, to be logged in at a time. Presumably this is due to complex software licensing rules. It's understandable, but made the making of this video a little bit more, well, shall we say, fun. So if you wish to see more techie videos like this, go and hit that subscribe button. And until next time, this has been Sim.